There we go. Hello and welcome to Mindset Mondays with DTK. Welcome to episode 92. This is an ongoing series for folk with a growth mindset or those who'd like to develop one. The playground here is an opportunity to play with new ideas, new concepts, and try on new mindsets. So the opportunity we have today will come in just a moment. If you will take a second and click just below this video and click share to invite your folk, your friends, your colleagues, your community to this broadcast. The more voices we have in the conversation, the richer the conversation. Today, here's the quote we get to play with. Here's the quote we get to play with. Let's see if it promotes. There we go. The most effective way to rebel against structure is to tear down the walls. First is to understand the structure we aim to reinvent. This was a post from Sinek several weeks ago that came up. The most effective way to rebel against structure and tear down walls is first to understand the structure we aim to reinvent. Look, I enjoyed this one. I think that as we come up towards the end of the year and we start looking at what we want to create for the new year, invariably there's some aspect of breaking down the old and building something new. And God, there's so much to play with. I mean, I think our tendency is often to look at blindly tearing down that which we feel doesn't serve, right? And that's not always the ideal way to play, right? When we tear down without paying attention to what it is that we want to build, we lose the opportunity to work with the raw materials left over from that tearing down. I hope that makes sense. I want to play with that a little bit. You know, look at it this way. I learned years ago, the map is not the territory. Right? The idea is the map is a diagrammatic representation of some area showing the physical features, right? But it's just a representation. It's not the area itself, right? So to get a true feel for an area or a system, particularly one that you want to tear down, you can't map it from the outside. You have to be in it. You have to understand the system or the culture that you want to shift. You have to have an intimate grasp of what makes it up. In order to, it's not ideal to just summarily lay waste. You miss the resources that are available. Think of it as tearing down a building, but doing it in such a way that you can use the bricks from that building to construct what you want, the home you want to build next. We often see rebellion as the goal of just dismantling. But again, we have the opportunity not to go in with a wrecking ball, but to literally dismantle it so that we can use what's there, those raw materials. The sustainable initiative or movement begins with clarity about what's to be built. So long before raising that rebel flag and raising the buildings around you and leveling the landscape, there's an opportunity to look at, damn, what do we want to build and how can we utilize what's here? There was an interview this morning. I was listening to an NPR, a woman, I'll try to pull her name, got a new book coming out. And the idea of talking about what's happening with the Me Too movement, and that it's not up to the offender nor the feminist, as she was describing it, to determine how it is that those people recover and return. And there's been so much talk about all these folks that have been canceled due to the Me Too movement and their obvious transgressions. How is it that they recover? Well, she used the example of and this is not where I thought this conversation was going to go. She used the conversation of Louis C.K., who's now just announced a nationwide stand-up tour. And she said there's no roadmap to define for how you return from such transgressions and such failure? How do you re-enter the society and begin to make contributions again based on who you are and what you can contribute to this world? How do you amend for and return to our culture, right? So there are no rules for how you rebuild. What her suggestion was, start trying. Decide what it is that you want to see rebuilt and begin to experiment with it. And doing that in a sensitive way and an aware way, if the culture responds positively, then continue to work at it. If it doesn't, retrench, retry. But most of these folks have been torn down, and I'm not saying whether it's appropriate or not, torn down summarily, just razed to the ground. And so they're having to recreate out of whole cloth. I wonder what happens as we dismantle this asinine patriarchy in which we find ourselves trying to raise young women and young men. And how do we rebuild it in a way that serves going forward? How do we look at what it is that we want to create as we then structurally and intentionally dismantle what our culture has become? And whether you're looking at a culture, an organization, a family system, a relationship, anywhere down the line, looking at what it is you want to create next can determine how you dismantle what currently exists. I think our tendency now, people I hear calling it cancel culture, is to just destroy and move on from there and see how things go. I think there's an opportunity to be more intentional. Now, taking that away from the Me Too movement and the patriarchy and looking at it in terms of what do you want in your world? As you look at what you want your next chapter to be, we are so good as human beings at saying what we don't like. I don't like this. I hate this. This is terrible. This is awful. I see it in partnerships and relationships all the time. It's easy to complain. What we're not very good at is talking about what it is that we want, the dream behind that complaint. And I think Sinek's quote, talking about understanding the structure we aim to reinvent, that's speaking directly to the idea of the dream behind the complaint. Until we know what it is that we want to create. Much harder to move forward. Allowing the dream that we want to create to drive our actions instead of merely the complaint about what's terrible. Even back with the civil rights movement, yes, there was so much that was wrong, and there were so many around Martin Luther King that were deft at wielding the complaints. It was a huge movement, and yet he took a different tack, and Sinek talks about it in part of his Start With Why conversation. The idea of becoming an expert at describing the world you want to see created. It wasn't even the I have a plan speech, it was the I have a dream speech. A time where little black boys and little black girls can walk hand in hand, where children are judged on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. He was describing the vision of what he wanted to see created. He wasn't talking about the complaint. It was the dream that was behind that complaint. And that was a rally cry that accelerated and expanded and movement and changed this country. More change is needed, yes. And right now in our political system, we're superb at complaining. Oh my God, can we complain? Doesn't matter what side of the aisle, we complain incredibly well. But how many of us are actually talking about our dream behind the complaint, what we want to see different, and allowing that to drive our actions? Wanting somebody gone is not enough. That's just an elegant complaint. That's not a dream of the future. I don't think we have anybody on either side that's a rally cry for the country to unite behind. We don't yet. Yeah, I'm hopeful. But the idea of speaking to the dream behind the complaint, what we want this country to be, what we want our organization to be, our family to be, our relationships to be. Focusing our attention on that which we wish to create, not that which we wish to destroy. Once we're clear about what it is we want to see created, that which exists begins to come apart, even before we start tearing it down. It takes less energy to move towards something, to move towards the dream, to lean into what it is that we want to see created, what it is we aim to reinvent. That motion, that drive, that movement, by its very nature, begins to dismantle that which exists. So you have the opportunity. Brute force wrecking ball, the running away from, the irritation, the complaint, or letting our energy be driven by what it is that we want to see created in this world and moving towards that. Partially dismantling what exists and partially leaving it behind and making it outdated and superfluous. So it's Monday, right? We are, in 4 days, we will be halfway through this quarter, screaming towards the end of the year. I had the opportunity this week to begin to create that dream, to begin to articulate what it is that we want to create. And thank you, Dan, to articulate it in terms of what we want to see created and what we will change and who we will become, and rally others to lean into that rather than trying to change others. I have to think that basing our dream and our plans on changing others is almost as much energy wasted as focusing solely on being the wrecking ball. There's that opportunity to focus on the dream that we want to see created. And the famous quote, be the change you want to see in the world. Create the dream and begin to create it internally and live it externally. So it's Monday. What will you do this week? What will you commit to changing? When will you spend time creating the vision, the dream that you want to see created, the dream behind your complaints? New relationship, new job, new company, new business, whatever it is. How will you invest your energy and time and effort into creating that dream? So between now and next Monday, what mindset will you choose?